Welcome. Welcome, everybody. We have 55 countries joining this webinar, so there's a huge interest in knowing about the UN Resolution 4/299 on improving road safety. To explain this UN resolution, we have invited Etienne Krug, who is the Director of Social Determinants of Health at the WHO. Welcome, Etienne.
Hi, Lotte. Hi, everybody.
Before you give us an overview of your role in the development of the resolution and take us through what the resolution is, we would like to know a little bit about our audience and what your initial reaction to the UN resolution is. And to do this, we have made a few poll questions, and you should be able to see them on your screen now. So you can see here that it's half on people knowing they have read it in detail and they have read it secondhand. It's great. That's good. So you can be quite detailed. Great. Next question. How are you feeling about the resolution? Right. Hoping but not sure. But few are doubtful. That's great. It's good news. 41% optimistic. That's really good. Great. And last question. Sort of, they are aware, but no progress or plans yet. Followed by no, because they're not prioritizing it. What are your comments to these replies? Etienne?
Well, I think it's
as expected.
Yeah, I think as expected. I'm happy to see people are moderately optimistic, but cautious as well. And I think it's normal that not all governments are fully ready yet, because this is still very fresh and newly adopted. But certainly, it's encouraging.
Yeah. All right. Okay. So the next 50 minutes. We will dig into the resolution, and all of you have sent questions, and we will try to get as many answers as possible. We have pulled your questions together, so you it might not be the word by word the question that you put, but we're trying to cover as much as possible. So it's just looking over the resolution. It looks like it has two parts. One is looking back, and one is looking forward. But for those of us who are not so well versed in the operations of countries and of the UN, what is a resolution really?
Okay, well, before I start, maybe first of all, thanks Lotte and Liz and the team for organizing this opportunity to discuss this new resolution and hear from the NGOs around the world what their sense is, what their questions are, and how we can, move forward together. As I think most of you know, I believe a lot in the importance of NGOs and the important role they have in advancing road safety. So I'm really happy we can be here, and I see many names of friends popping up in the chat box, and hi to everybody. I wish I could see you in person and have a little chat. It's not going to be possible today, but hopefully soon. So what is a resolution? I think it's good to start there. A resolution of the UN General Assembly or the World Health Assembly is an important document. It's the result of discussions between all the governments of the world. It's a document where governments commit in doing, well, usually there's two parts. There's the preambular part where they kind of summarize the past and the current situation. And then there is what we call the operative part, which is the second half, where there are commitments made by the governments on what the next steps should be. These are the results of intense negotiations. And we have to be honest, this is a political process. So this is not only about road safety. It is about politics. It is about economical impact some of these things may have. It is about compromising. Some governments are very ambitious, others are less ambitious. Some governments want to advance very fast, others want to advance slow. Some have a lot of resources, some don't. So it is really a compromise. Some also approach it from a very scientific way, and others more from an advocacy way. So there are many different perspectives and many different issues that come into play. But in the end, they do agree on a text. In this case, and in view of the current COVID situation, the process was a little bit different from in the past. In the past, they actually do sit down in New York when it's the UNGA, or in Geneva when it's the World Health Assembly, and they discuss face-to-face the different paragraphs. They take it paragraph by paragraph, and in the paragraph, they take it word by word. Sometimes comma or dots have an importance, so it is heavily negotiated. In this case, because they couldn't meet in person, it was done more in writing. And in the end, there was what they call a silent procedure, so which is basically a period of 10 days or 2 weeks, where if no one objects, the text is adopted. And this is how this resolution was adopted. What is very important to know is that it is not binding. So a government can make promises, can commit to do things, but it is not legally binding, I should say. Nobody can hold them really totally accountable for what they would have committed into this document. But there is some moral obligation, having come together, having spent long hours negotiating the text. Of course, there is an obligation, at least morally, to do something on this text.
What are, in your view, what are the main points in this resolution?
Well, this is an important resolution. We've had resolutions every 2 years since 2004. So we've had a number already of resolutions. This is probably the strongest one in terms of content. Some resolutions, because they are so much negotiated, in the end, don't end up with a lot. In this one, we have a number of strong decisions, and a few are actually binding in the sense that they do not bind one individual government, but bind the whole international community. So it is, I have the document here, it's a 9-page document, but the main points are in the operative paragraphs, as always, so in the second half of the resolution. It is an endorsement of the Stockholm Declaration. So that's the declaration that was adopted in the ministerial conference in February, just before we all went in lockdown. And it declares the second decade of action for road safety, the period of 2021 till 2030, with a specific target, which we did not have for the first decade as such, which is a 50% reduction in deaths and injuries. So that's a major, very positive accomplishment of this resolution. Immediately after that paragraph, there is one asking WHO and the UN regional commissions and the UN Road Safety Collaboration, the UNRSC, and other partners to develop a global action plan for this decade of action. So this is a plan basically about how can we reduce deaths and injuries by 50% over the next 10 years. Again, I think that's very important because it, contrary to the first decade, the UNGA doesn't mention officially the need for a plan and asks us to develop it. That's again, I think, a step forward. And then the third big global point, which is again binding, and so I just want to clarify. I've said this is non-binding in the sense that it cannot oblige any individual government to do anything. But what is kind of binding is the global commitments for the United Nations. So the third, so the first one is the decade, that's for sure. Second one is a plan, that's for sure. And the third one is to hold a high-level meeting of the UN General Assembly before the end of 2022. So in the next 2 years and a bit, we need to have a high-level meeting. What's a high-level meeting? It's basically a high-level political one-day meeting, usually just before the opening of the UN General Assembly, which is exactly happening this week in New York. It's usually the third week of September, where heads of state, in non-COVID times, heads of state would travel to New York and meet in person. So the opportunity is often taken to hold a one-day meeting because the heads of state are coming to New York anyway to meet in town on a specific topic of importance. And so now we have managed to get road safety as the topic of that important gathering. We'll see how the world will be in 2 years. Hopefully we'll have a vaccine, we'll be able to travel again, and we'll have heads of state in the meeting room, but otherwise we'll see how things have evolved since then. So that's the third important global commitment in this resolution. And then there's a lot of paragraphs that are of a more technical nature, encouragement to governments to continue improving basically all the aspects of the safe system, infrastructure, vehicles, legislation on people's behavior and enforcement, trauma care. There's a number of, let's say, the more classical road safety points. There is also a new spin on all of it, which comes from the Stockholm Declaration, which is, I'd say, more in the sustainable mobility area, where there's encouragement to have more public transport, to protect better cyclists and pedestrians, to have more sustainable modes of transportation. So that's also very important. And then finally, towards the end, there's also a request for more funding and contributions towards road safety, which we've had in the past and have not always led to much more funding, but are good to have.
Yeah.
In a nutshell, I mean, I encourage, I've seen at least half of you have already looked at the resolution, and if you haven't, I would encourage everybody to do so. But in a nutshell, this is like the most important items in this resolution. But there's many others that you may want to look at.
Yeah, yeah. So we, as I said, we have received a lot of questions, and I tried to pool them together. And the first group of questions is really around the difference between the first and the second decade of action and what we have learned. And to pose that question, we have invited Vincent Vandera from Safe Way, Right Way in Kenya to ask a question. Vincent, are you with us? You're muted right now, so maybe you could unmute. Hi.
Hello.
Hi, Vincent.
Hello.
Welcome.
So,
You have a
Dr.
question
Krug,
around the decade of action and the
yes.
Yeah, please go.
Okay, Dr. Krug, my question to you is, the first decade of action did not achieve the goal to have road crash fatalities. In your view, what must happen in this second decade to achieve this ambitious goal? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah. So in terms of the first decade, the UN General Assembly had actually stated that it declared this decade with the view of stabilizing the number of deaths in the world and starting or initiating a reduction. So we actually have more or less stabilized the number of deaths. So in that sense, we did what the UN General Assembly had planned for. And I think we did well on a number of fronts during the first decade, which is going to help us for the second. We did build a more solid international community, and the fact that we are here speaking today is one of the results of that, because the Global Alliance flourished really during the first decade, and it grew, it became stronger, and having a stronger civil society is extremely important to move issues forward. We have also yours and a stronger youth movement, again, very important. We have more donors that have come around the table. We have stronger technical knowledge. We have a stronger international community and organization around UNRSC. And we have a number of countries which have made good progress in the last 10 years in the EU, in Brazil, in Russia, in a number of countries, the number of deaths has gone down considerably. So I think in the first decade, we did lay the ground for a lot of good work to happen in the future. We had a good plan for the first decade. I think where we were not strong enough is in making sure that governments use the global plan to develop their own plans and started acting in the context of the decade on implementing the different aspects of the SAFE system. I think we're better set up now to ensure that in the future, but it's also something we need to do together. Certainly we in the UN system are going to push for that and have learned from the first decade what we need to improve in the second. But I also hope we can work with the NGO community on holding governments accountable and encouraging them to take action on this important issue. So
in your view, just to Vincent's question, in your view, what must happen in the second decade to achieve this goal? Is that accountability?
I think, of course, we need to develop that plan and we need to make sure it's a good plan. But I don't see why we wouldn't be able to do that. But I also think that after that, yes, we need to communicate more with governments, ensure that they are aware and know about the decade and the plan, because despite the fact that there is a resolution, there is a lot of talk about it, in many countries, the decision makers are still not aware of it. So I think on one hand, it's a lot of communication and awareness raising. And on the other hand, yes, Lotte, I think accountability will be very important and we will need all of us to work together to hold governments accountable for having committed to this.
Yeah.
Maybe I should talk a little bit. I think you mentioned that in the very beginning about the co-sponsoring countries. So this resolution was tabled by the government of the Russian Federation, but more than 70 countries have what we called co-sponsored it, which means that they feel strong enough about it to put their name on the resolution, which I think when we talk about accountability, and that's why I mention it, it's very important because it is not insignificant for a country to put its name on a UN resolution. It really means some kind of additional commitment to do something with it. So at least those 70 or 80 countries need to be held even more accountable than the others. So I think all of us should look at that list and make sure that those governments at least start acting. And it's not because a government is not co-sponsoring that, of course, they're off the hook. They also will need to do it, but it's an additional element.
Yeah. There's a question here, if the UN resolution is not binding, how can NGOs make best use of the resolution to advance road safety at the local settings from Egypt?
Yeah, it's a little bit what I just said. I think, first of all governments have agreed to this resolution because they did not break the silent procedure, which means they have all agreed. Second, they all have, therefore, a moral obligation to do something with it, in addition just to the fact that the number of deaths and injuries on their roads are way too high, and so they have a double moral obligation. So NGOs can, I think it's a bit carrot and stick in the sense that NGOs can play a very helpful and constructive role in encouraging the government, in making them aware of it, in making them aware of the resources that are out there, all the knowledge that exists, but also in gently pushing them into action. And if nothing really happens, hold them more accountable. This could be through monitoring, countdown type of exercises, or encouraging the media to talk more about the issue. And in the end, yes, if needed, I think NGOs know how to organize movements and and noise and protests around an issue. But I don't think that's the first thing to do. I would say the first thing is really a constructive attitude of saying, okay, how can we work together, government, national government, city government, local government, on this resolution and implementing it.
Yeah. Moving on here, reading through the resolution, it's a new way of talking about road safety. It's I don't know, it's a more sophisticated way to speak about road safety. Holistic is mentioned a couple of times. Are countries ready for this?
Well, as I said in the beginning, I mean, all countries are at different stages. So I think certainly quite a number of them are ready to think in that way. For others who are just beginning to wake up to it, maybe it's a bit more difficult. Those who have no resources as well. But at least I think being aware of the importance of thinking about all of the aspects of the road safety system is important. I think going back to the question of what lessons have we learned, for me, I certainly have learned that on one hand, we need to tick the different boxes of the basics of road safety. You cannot have road safety if you don't have decent infrastructure, decent vehicles, good legislation in place, etc. But at the same time, focusing only on one of those pieces is not enough, and having also the whole foundation of leadership, a good plan, an integrated approach, thinking about safer public transport and walking and cycling and all of these different aspects, including also the financing, is all very important as well. So unfortunately, it's not just one thing that will solve the issue. We have to think holistically, but at the same time also continue to think about the basics.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking about the structures in many countries is that you have a Ministry of Transport and you have a Ministry of Health, and you have all these. Now we're talking about integration of the issue. I think the UN is also structured that way. You have different agencies for different things. So does this require that everything is up in the air and changed, or what does it mean?
No. I think. Well, it depends on how each country is structured, but certainly I think it's a strength in a way, because very often, there was like one person in an obscure ministry in the basement somewhere all alone thinking about road safety and ignored by all the rest. I think if that person now knows that there is an opportunity to work with the Ministry of Health or Education or Justice and Transport on different aspects, it may be a strength, and it could become a team rather than one person. Even if the resources are not dramatically increased, it's certainly helpful, I think, to bring together these different pieces. And that's also where civil society can have a role in making sure it happens. And sometimes government bureaucrats or even UN bureaucrats are cut out of reality in their own little bubble, and helping them see the bigger picture, helping them link up with other parts of government as well as of civil society and academia can be very helpful.
I think it's Article 34 that mentioned a lot of partners and the stakeholder approach, and ask a question around that. We have Catarina Niello from Minu in Argentina. Are you with us? Hi, Catarina.
Hello.
Hello, I think I am now.
You are.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me too in this conversation. We talk about taking accountability and that governments are not legally binding to take this resolution, but we as youth, we are taking more active roles as change makers. So my question is, how the partnerships and collaborations that are pointed out in the Article 34 can be meaningful for the decision making, including us, including the youth and the organizations, as a part of the solution, and not only to take accountability, not only to be the ones that are asking the government to take actions, but to be part of those solutions.
Gracias. Yeah, no, I think this article is important in the sense, I think this resolution on one hand put a lot of emphasis on the role of governments, rightfully so, because governments need to take the lead and need to take their responsibilities. And there are things that only governments can do, like the infrastructure, like the legislation, like vehicle standards, etc. But it also, in this article, stresses the role that all other players have, from academia to the private sector to civil society and youth actors. And I think that's very important. We all have a role to play, including us individuals. When I think back at the Stockholm conference just 6 months ago, I do immediately also remember the NGO events and the Youth Assembly in particular, where I was really energized by seeing so many young people having come from all over the world with so much energy, committing to do more. And of course, this was hampered right after by COVID, but I hope the youth movement will continue strongly as it did in Stockholm, because we need youth on one hand to involve other young people. We know that they are the most affected in terms of deaths and injuries and disability. We also know they are part of the solution in terms of their own behavior, but also in terms of helping governments to take action. So I believe strongly that young people will have a key role in the next decade, in addition to the rest of civil society, of course.
All right. There is some questions around, there's one here. How will UN monitor progress on achievements, and bearing in mind that there is no enforcement power?
Yeah, so we do have a set of global targets, which was already agreed on by governments and which is mentioned in this resolution. So that's certainly a set of things we will be monitoring. We also have the global status reports that WHO does every 2 or 3 years, which monitor country by country what the situation is and allows us to monitor progress. And of course, we will continue monitoring mortality at the global level. So I think there's a number of ways to monitor progress at the international level, and we will continue doing that. But the most important really would be for each country to set its own targets, to measure its targets, and have the national academic centers or NGOs to look into that as well, so that we are sure we have independent evaluation of each country, in the country, by the country, because that's the most important really, that there is this ownership which will lead to much more action, I hope.
Yeah. There's one here, how can we treat the resolution not as an aspiration that we may or may not be able to achieve, but more as a set of value-based standards that nations should not diverge from without evidential justification?
Well, I think I have a lot of hope in this global plan that we are going to develop. And by the way, we're just starting on this because it's of course a complex undertaking involving many partners, but we have to make sure it's a solid plan, and it's a plan that can be used by all governments as one model they could use to develop their own national plan and possibly even local plans in the bigger countries. So once we have that plan, hopefully the the country government can be using it as a guide for its own implementation. Hopefully it has targets to monitor progress, and hopefully the NGO community will work with the government to make sure it is not just ink on paper, but it's really a tool that's being used for progress.
Yeah. Okay. The SDG 3.6 is up to 2020. Will this be changed? And if so, how and when? What's the process there?
It's done. So indeed, there was SDG 3.6 targets to have a 50% reduction in deaths and injuries on the road by 2020. We definitely did not achieve that, but we knew it was a very overly ambitious target when it was set. It was almost a mistake, frankly. It should have been 2030 instead of 2020, but one of the member states during the negotiation process just changed that at the last minute, which caught us all by surprise. So I think now in this resolution, we have rectified that. We have a new target of a 50% reduction between 2021 and 2030. And we have some text, it's some convoluted text that I think it's hard to understand if you're not into these diplomatic circles, but basically there is some language in there which has been heavily negotiated and is now standard UN language to say, we extend the SDG target. So it's done. We had the famous 50 by 30 campaign, and this campaign has definitely resulted in a new target of a 50% reduction by 2030. So sorry, and maybe I should say, this is the global target. Some regions have already set a similar target, for example, in the European Union, in some parts of the world, I think in Africa, they also have a similar target already for that same period. But of course, each country will have to set its own target and decide how it wants to contribute to this 50% target for the world. In some countries, it might be hard to do 50%. In others, it might be possible to do even more. So there needs to be a concerted commitment and discussion and then commitment to such a target. And again, I think here civil society has a role to play to make sure this debate happens. And the question needs to be asked to each government. Say, okay, there is now a global target of 50% reduction. In our country, what will be our target? Will it be 50? Will it be 70 or 60 or 40? Maybe there's a reason for that. And how will it be achieved? So I think it's an excellent starting point for discussion in each country.
Yeah. So there's been some questions around this bindingness, and you covered that it's not binding, but then I think you called it moral obligations. I think maybe elaborate a little bit more about, there's some countries who have co-signed the resolution. Are they more binding for them? And how about the countries who have not signed the resolution? What advice do you have to the NGOs in regard to this?
Yeah, so as I said, there is one part that overall UN resolutions in general are non-binding, but in a way there is a part that is kind of set that needs to happen and will happen, which is the part directed towards the UN and the international community. So the decade is declared, there's no coming back on that. The request to have a global plan will oblige us to develop a global plan to achieve this 50% reduction during the next 10 years. The commitment to hold a high-level meeting should happen in all cases. So that's kind of binding. What's not binding is each government's responsibility. That remains the decision of the government. Of course, as I said, by having co-sponsored this resolution, those countries that have put their name on it, and there's more than 70 who did, have even more of a moral obligation than the others to act. But all governments have agreed to this and have committed to do something. So yes, it's up to us to to encourage them to not forget about that commitment. I think one of the challenges we have is, as we all know, governments change with time. And so those that have committed to the decade and the 50% reduction will still be there for 1 or 2 or 3 years in most cases, but that will change. And the new governments coming in might not even know that in 2020 this resolution was adopted. So I think over time there's also a duty by all of us to make sure that as governments change, the knowledge does not disappear and the commitments continue.
The next set of questions is moving forward. So one of the questions is, it's related to what you just said. Can a country set the target less than 50% reduction by 2030? And are there any consequences? Or you mentioned the moral obligation. Is there anything there?
I think it's important every country has a solid reflection on what is reasonably possible. You know, I personally would prefer a country to say we can only do 30% and do it, than a country say, yes, we'll do 80% because we're the best, and then actually not achieve anything because it was just a vague, unrealistic promise. So yes, ideally all of them should go towards 50 in order to achieve the global 50% reduction. But in some countries, we have to recognize that things are still very difficult, the resources are not there is no culture of road safety, and maybe it is difficult to do 50%. And on the other spectrum, some of the countries who have done the most already will probably have a hard time to reduce even more by 50%. So I'm not too dogmatic about everybody has to do 50%. I would rather see a solid reflection and have an informed decision and commitment by government and civil society and academia and private sector about what should be done in each of the countries, and then work together to achieve it.
Yeah. There is a question, the version that I printed out from the website here doesn't have the co-sponsors. I know those previous versions who had the co-sponsors. Is there a way that we can get access to the co-sponsors?
Yeah, I think there is I'm not 100% sure about, there is a period after the adoption for the resolution where countries can still express their desire to be co-sponsors. I think it's at least 2 weeks, it could be more, which might explain why the final list is not there, because it takes a little bit of time for countries to consult with their capitals, the decision to be taken, for it to come back. So we should check, I don't know exactly. So there was an initial list, which was at the time of adoption, because some of them had been part of the negotiation, they already knew they wanted to co-sponsor. But then after that, others can join, and that final list, I'm not sure if it's available already. I saw a while ago there was at least 70 countries, but I'm not sure where it stands exactly today. But it should be possible, definitely at some stage the list will be available. So
could you let us know where to find it, and we can put it on our website?
Yeah, I have to dig it up.
People would like to know if their country want to celebrate and also push if they have if they're not co-sponsors.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. The next question is from India, and we have Harpreet Singh with us to ask that. Hello, Harpreet. Welcome.
Hello, Lotte, how are you?
Yeah, fine, thank you.
Sir, my question is, as WHO has been requested to prepare a plan of action as a guided document, when could we expect the release of this document? Would you allow the NGOs to join WHO in the development of this document? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Of course, developing such a plan is a big job and requires a lot of thinking and consulting and discussing and some negotiations. So the process has just started. The resolution is quite specific in saying that it requests the World Health Organization and the UN regional commissions in collaboration with the UN Road Safety Collaboration and other partners to do this. So I definitely see civil society part of this. The NGO Alliance and a few NGOs are part of the UNRSC already and will be in that way involved, but also later on, I'm sure we'll open it up to additional input. So there will be opportunities for input at some stage. Exactly when, it's hard to promise, but developing this plan will take several months. It's not going to be in the coming week or two that consultation will be possible, but certainly I would hope in November or December we would open it up for additional input. And definitely we'll make sure that the Alliance as a secretariat for many of you, as well as hopefully through other ways, NGOs will be involved.
So that you mentioned a consultation, it's a consultative process.
Yes. How, don't ask me how it's going to happen, we don't know yet, but there will be opportunities. I don't know if it's going to be a web-based consultation or if we'll have some meetings like this to discuss. I don't know yet.
Yeah. So to your question, Harpreet, the release of the document, Etienne says sometimes as soon as possible. Around November, there might be a first draft available. And yes, NGOs will have an opportunity to provide comments to it. This new plan of action, will that be around the 5 pillars?
There's discussion around that. I think the direction it's taking is that the plan for the first decade was a good plan. There was a lot of solid elements in there, and we should not lose the strength of that plan. At the same time, the world has moved beyond that. There is more recognition of some other aspects of road safety, like the sustainability, like the leadership needed, like the funding needed. So there will be additional aspects. Are we keeping exactly the 5 pillars? Some want that, and I'm also part of that group. Others would like a 6th pillar on speed. Others would like to do away with the whole 5 pillars and have another way of looking at it. So this is not resolved yet, but we will see. But certainly, I'm a strong proponent of evolving with the Stockholm Declaration and the new thinking, while at the same time keeping the strong knowledge of the basics of road safety, which are the 5 pillars.
Yeah. Great. There is some questions around sort of, I wouldn't say ranking, but are you happy about, what should we as NGOs be happy about in this resolution? And what should we not be so happy about?
I think you should be happy about the resolution in general. First of all, that we have one. It was not easy to get a resolution through in the current geopolitical environment. That it's a solid one that has good technical content, including a new decade and a specific target and a high-level meeting, which is an opportunity to keep political momentum at the highest level of government. That it recognizes the important role of governments, but also the role of other players, including civil society, and that there's a lot of technical content in it. So I think there's a huge role for civil society to play in terms of raising awareness about the existence of the resolution. I'm sure many governments, sometimes it's possible that the diplomatic mission in New York endorses the resolution, supports the development, but that in the capital, there's very little knowledge about what has happened in New York. So first of all, we need to make sure that every government and all the relevant people are aware that this resolution exists. Second, that they contribute to the thinking. We will want every country to have a plan for the new decade. They should be taught on a new target, as I said. They should be taught on responsibilities. Who will be responsible for carrying out each of these activities, the overall coordination, the funding. So there's a lot of work where I think NGOs can be strong advocates for making sure that the thought process happens and it leads to concrete decisions. After that, there are many different roles for NGOs in carrying out some activities, from awareness raising to support to bereaved families, to encouragement for solid trauma care, or lobbying for legislation, or encouraging the media to speak up. Of course, doing World Remembrance Day, the UN Road Safety Weeks. I mean, there's so many options that, I'm sure NGOs will have plenty of opportunities to contribute, I think, to the overall thinking as well as to the carrying out of specific activities.
So you mentioned the head of state meeting, the high-level head of state meeting. Mm-hmm. Why is this important, and what should NGOs, how can NGOs be involved in pushing for that? What will be the role for NGOs? Isn't that just a bunch of high-level people meeting and then talking in behind closed doors, and that's it?
Hopefully it will be more than that. Yes, there is some of that, but it is important to have these meetings because there is always a lot of preparatory work in order to make sure that those who participate are prepared, that they know what's going on in their country, that they come with a message, that they absorb the message of the meeting, go home to do more. So in that sense, it's important in terms of awareness raising and commitment making. It's particularly important, I think, in the current environment where the Stockholm conference and declaration were great and really big catalysts and energizers, but unfortunately, due to COVID, some of that momentum was lost, and policymakers, of course, got other priorities to deal with. So hopefully by 2022, this is behind us, and we can use this conference to regain attention and momentum. It will already be 2 years into the new decade, so an opportunity to see what progress has been made. Does every country have a plan? Is the plan being used? So for NGOs, again, there will be a lot of contribution to make. Usually we try to give a space to NGOs in the meeting. There will be work to make sure that the country is represented, each country, hopefully at the head of state level or at a very high level, and that it is not just an empty representation, but something that is meaningful in order to report back on initial progress and absorb more information to go back and do more. So these meetings are important. We shouldn't put all our eggs in that basket. They are only one element of the entire planning for the decade, but there will be a good opportunity to raise awareness and continue the political momentum. As we've said over and over again, it is a very multi-sectoral issue. It is an issue where governments need to take leadership. So obliging heads of state to come, listen, participate, give speeches, obliges them also to take some kind of leading role in their own country. And that's exactly what we need.
Now the resolution is, what is it called? Endorsed? Passed? Adopted. That's the right wording, yeah. Now what? Are there any launch, or what's the plan here?
So I think there is work for everybody to make sure every government is fully aware, and everybody in governments, not just one person, but the different ministers of transport, of interior, of health, of education need to know about this. Prime ministers need to know about it, and they need to start getting ready. We do not know exactly when the decade starts. I think officially or implicitly on the 1st of January 2021, so in 3 months and a bit. But we might have a global launch. For the first decade, we did it in May, on the 11th of May. 2011, we could do it around that time again. We don't know yet. The idea would be to have a solid plan, global plan, ready by then and launched. But we hope to circulate drafts in advance so that countries can make their own national plans based on the global plan. And that's where I think there's huge opportunity for civil society to make sure that discussion happens, that preparations happen, not only for a big firework launching the decade in each country, but also make it a meaningful launch with commitments, with announcements of funding, with announcements of targets to achieve, with announcements of activities that will take place. And that will not happen by itself. It will require a lot of work by all of us, the UN system and civil society groups, to make sure that as many countries as possible will take it seriously and do something.
Etienne, we need to wrap up. Do you have anything you would like to say towards the end?
Well, certainly a big thanks to all of you, and I should have started there. I mean, this resolution would not have been adopted if not many NGOs had done their lobbying work in their own country with their own government to encourage them to support and adopt. So first of all, thank you to you, Lotte and Liz and the team, but also to each individual NGO in your countries. I know it's hard because you're there and struggling on a daily basis with no money and little knowledge of what is happening in the world. So an event like this is great because it gives me an opportunity to thank all of you for what you're doing on a daily basis, what you've done to get us where we are today with this resolution, and what hopefully you will do in the future. I mean, count on us, be in touch through Lotte or directly with how we can help you. We want really action in each country, and this is a great time to do it. So thanks.
That's good. Thank you. As you all know, Etienne is the birth attendant of the Alliance, so we wouldn't be here without you, Etienne, so thank you for that. Just to wrap up, what you mentioned was it's a strong resolution we have here. There is a great opportunity for NGOs to join hands with governments, with private sector, youth, all the players, but also cross some of the other sectors. And it's important that we don't work in silos, that we start connecting with other sectors and other groups who have a similar agenda as we do in saving lives. And this resolution really invites to that. The resolution is important because it's announcing a new decade of action with a target. There's a plan being made, which is also in the resolution and this high-level meeting. We have in preparation. We have, as you can see, we have done a lot of work in trying to spread the word about the resolution and the importance of it. And in our newsletter that's coming out on Friday, the 26th of September, it will include a lot of views from different angles. We have a comment from the Minister of Transport from Sweden, Minister Eneroth. We have comments from the private sector. We have comments from a lot of the people who have advocated strongly for 50 by 30 and also advice for NGOs. So please make sure you read the newsletter. In this newsletter will also be a summary of this call. And if you don't get our newsletter, please sign up to it at our website, roadsafetynGOs.org. But Etienne, I think you said it enough talking. It's time for rolling up our sleeves. And on behalf of the NGOs, I can promise you that we are ready. So thank you very much for now, and take care and look after yourself. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. Bye, everybody.
Bye.